From my perspective, a successful COP29 would be one where the interests of all parties are equally reflected in the text.
Hello and welcome to another special edition of COP29 coverage on Green Growth TV. With the summit entering its final stages, the pressure is mounting to turn negotiations into meaningful actions. As the impacts of climate change intensify, countries around the world, particularly the most vulnerable countries, they are trying and coming together to see that how they can protect both their people and the economy, grappling with the issues that we see all over today, from the ecosystems to the economies and all of that. So today we want to explore the strategies and the commitment, as well as the innovations that have been discussed at COP29 so far to bolster resilience in the face of an uncertain future. So today I have with me Melissa Takudzwa, Executive Director for Young Volunteers for the Environment Program in Gambia. And I also have Axel Eriksson, Training Manager, Climate Youth Negotiator Program. Thank you all so much for joining. How are you all doing today?
I'm doing well, considering that it's one of the last days of the COP.
Yeah, exactly. How about you, Melissa? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so
All right, so let's just get straight to it. Let me start with you, Axel. Like you've already mentioned, I mean, we just have one day to go left with the negotiations, and it seems like there's been very slow progress. A lot of decisions have not come to a conclusion. There's still a lot of division on the scale of climate finance, especially, and who should pay and who should the payment go to. So what more needs to be done in this final stages to push for the desired outcome? And in fact, and aside that, or what has already been done, because I know this morning at 7 a.m. the new NDCs were released. So what's the context of that NDC, especially as regards climate finance, and what's slowing us down, and what more do we need to see just before this conference wraps up?
So one of the main things about finance, which is recurring across each COP, is that it's the specific amount is decided on ministerial level usually, and since during the first week it was technical negotiations with people working at the ministry who were basically negotiating the text. They didn't arrive at a specific number. And now in the second week, we will see quite many closed door consultations where basically the ministers will be agreeing upon this. So that's one of the things that has slowed it down to this particular stage. And also it's something that's highly, highly political, because setting a number on paper means also committing to something, especially for the developed countries, as they're called under the convention. It is also quite controversial. How should this finance be made accessible? How can it be ensured that basically it reaches directly to the communities that it's intended for, and how do we ensure that it's done in a transparent way? So that's the general context that I'm hearing about. Why is it delaying so much to see a specific number of financing? Because there's already been a specific number from the group of so-called developing countries under the UNFCCC, which was about 1.3 trillion US dollars, but we're still yet to see any concrete number from several developed country parties.
I'm throw that question to you as well, Melissa. What more do you think we need to see in this final stages to push for the desired outcome as regards climate finance to ensure that these funds actually meet the vulnerable communities that need them? What more do you expect to see just before the conference closes up?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. So maybe I'll just start by saying that after COP28 last year in Dubai, there were some concerns over the finances for loss and damage. And from this COP29, the desired expectation that to say we need to operationalize that loss and damage finance to make sure that these funds are able to be accessed by those countries that marginalized as well, the most affected countries. Because for this, we need to make sure that it is now fully operationalized and the developed states are able to pledge and also make sure that their pledges are met. We also need the governance structure because all our governments from developing countries from the global south, everyone is ready. The governments already have the structures in place, the contributions from the pledges looks like they are adequate and consistent, but we now need to operationalize these funds. We also have also need to focus on the fulfillment of the 100 billion pledge, where we are now saying that since we are now at the edges of the COP29, the developed countries, they need to meet their targets because it's now overdue. The 100 billion pledge that they made is now overdue. They haven't even met their pledges. So there is also need to make sure that there is transparency and also there is accountability in discussing these finances, and they should be also prioritized. The other issue, the last one that I can say that we are desiring to, in terms of climate finance, is to scale up this financing, because I'm sure you have heard the saying or the shift from the billions is now to the trillions, and these are the debts. So we now need to make sure that the developed countries, the global health countries, they pay up, because we are no longer talking of the billions, but we are now talking of the trillions, and we need to set a clear pathway for scaling up this climate financing, because from the global south, a lot of people are suffering, a lot of communities are suffering day by day, yet we don't have the finances to adapt to these catastrophic events and also to the impacts of climate change. We are suffering because of what? Because we are lacking these finances, and the pledges were made, but there's nothing up to now. That's why we have shifted from the billions, the trillions, and these trillions are expected or they are needed annually by 2030. Maybe I'll say particularly for adaptation, mitigation, and also resilient building in the global south countries. So yeah, maybe I'll just stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now let's look at still with you, Melissa, let's look at the issue of fossil fuels. I know there's been a lot of back and forth at the conference on the transitioning away from fossil fuels, especially in the negotiated text. We even have some people saying that countries like Saudi Arabia are intentionally holding back on those particular issues. So, but how has the progress been on the issue of transitioning away from fossil fuels at the conference, and how has this delay negatively impacted the global momentum rather and slow down the progress? So has the progress towards the fossil fuel transition rather, the transition away from fossil fuel rather, towards how has it slowed down, or is it getting better now that we just have one more day to go? What's the progress on that towards decarbonization in each of the countries that are there and, you know, globally?
Okay, thank you. I think for that I'll say there hasn't been any progress on that, because if I'm to remember very well, during the COP26 in Glasgow, all parties, they agreed to phasing. First of all, it was phasing out. Then later on, they were saying they need to phase down. But later on, I remember after in Egypt, they didn't talk much about phasing down, the phase out for fossil fuels. We went to Dubai. It was more like now the shift, it moved from the fossil fuels. Parties were now looking into other issues. Now we are in COP29. A lot of parties are now focusing on finance. This COP has been all about finances. And the main issues hindering that are that the global north countries are expecting us from the global south to do the same with them, simply because they feel like we also need to phase out or phase down fossil fuels, which we can't, because that's how we rely on that, and we are not at the same stage. We are not equal when it comes to these issues. So it's them phasing out fossil fuels first. Now that they brought the issues of the carbon credits, they now talk of them investing in some, I don't know, the carbon markets in the global south. So this is more like encouraging them to keep on polluting, to keep on going ahead with the use of fossil fuels. So I don't see the issue of phasing down fossil fuels, phasing out. The issue of phasing down fossil fuels going anyway, because in as much as want to talk of this, even here we are in Azerbaijan, we can take a look at how the country is structured. They also in support of this fossil. So we are not really in a position to say we need to face down this development or we need to face this topic. I don't know. They try to distract it with the carbon market, the carbon credit. So for now, I'll say there hasn't been any progress when it comes to fossil fuels. Whether I don't know now, I don't know if we are going to phase down or we are going to phase out. We are just going to continue. We are all now confused because even for this year, there were no specific topics to focus on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Axel, I also want to throw that question to you as well. Do you think that the fossil fuel transitioning away is something that also, like Melissa is trying to say, might not necessarily be able to achieve what we want to see in this COP29? Do you also hold that position as well, that that's not something we can achieve in this present ongoing conference, or that's something that has been ignored or that hasn't been paid enough attention to for us to see the desired results?
Yeah, I mean, there are very valid concerns that it might not be addressed. So there have been at least two different ways that it could have been addressed. So one is through the mitigation work program, which has met with quite a lot of challenges because it wasn't agreed upon by parties exactly how to discuss it, what the mandate would be, and so on. And then the other notable example is the cover decision. So at COP26, it was the first time there was a so-called cover decision, which was drafted by the presidency and then agreed upon by parties. And this is where the phrase that Melissa mentioned on phasing down unabated coal use and phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies was mentioned the first time, which was more or less repeated in COP27 in Egypt. And then for COP28, this is where the phrase transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems, if I remember correctly, was mentioned. And then a natural continuation would be to have a cover decision at this COP. But there are signals from the COP29 presidency that they would not have a cover decision on this. So we don't yet know if there will be a natural text where the issue of fossil fuels, phase down, phase out, whatever language the parties would choose, if there would be a text where they can even include it. At this stage, probably in a cover decision, but we don't know if such a cover decision will be made available to parties.
All right, so let's go back to the issue of financing. I mean, we just have one day to go. So far, considering that this COP has been termed the finance COP, that is the major thing that has been sought to achieve. Have there been any innovative financing mechanisms, maybe taxes or private sector contributions that have been considered or that have been already laid down to reach the $1 trillion climate finance target? So have there been any specific improvements? What pledges or commitments have been laid down so far at this COP29 to meet that climate finance target, especially for the vulnerable communities that are suffering from this climate crisis? Oh, that's to you, Alex.
Wonderful. So what is quite recurrent is that in this new financing target, there are calls for having a public finance core. But many parties, especially developed countries, argued that it's not enough with just public funding to meet the level of financing needed to really address the concerns or the needs of adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage in Global South. And this is why they are proposing that a large part of this goal comes from exactly what you said, innovative sources through the private sector.
Yeah,
exactly. And this is done primarily through something called the Article 21C of the Paris Agreement, which is basically a long-term goal that all finance should be in line with a climate resilient development. Exactly how this would be done, there are many different discussions. I don't have specific details on what it seems to be leaning towards now, but the main common factor is that it would be coming from the private sector, and it's about aligning existing financial flows with climate resilient development. And Article 6 is also another example of how trade of carbon credits can be done through market approaches. This is particular in 6.2, which is between states, and 6.4, which is between other actors on the international level. But exactly how this would contribute to reaching the new collective quantified goal that's being set out, it's hard to judge where the decision would land, but that's also been under discussion.
All right, thank you so much. So now, Melissa, let's now look at the discussion on adaptation and resilience. When we look at that, there's also the role of regional collaborations, which is growing in order to address this adaptation strategy. So are there new alliances or partnerships that have been formed, or initiatives that has come up during the COP29 that has aimed to improve resilience across Africa and other vulnerable regions? What improvement have we seen so far to ensure that these vulnerable communities are able to build adaptation and resilience with climate-fueled disasters?
Okay, thank you for that question. For now, I'll say the main priority is the mitigation finance, which is something that we do not really want from Africa. And the negotiations around adaptation were to say the nationally, to talk of the NDC, the National Adaptation Plan. But to start with, they were discussing on the adaptation committee, the indicators, because you were saying we need equal finances, like the mitigation finances for the adaptation finances. So a lot of discussions were done around the text, were done around the agenda, what we really need to take into consideration first, what is the agenda item. I know there is the UAE Berlin Working Program, which was mainly focusing on how they want to train the experts. It was more like they were focusing on technical issues of the experts. So for now, I would say that for the adaptation finances, it hasn't really come out, because if you have to talk of the MDCs, they only focus on mitigation. They don't focus much on adaptation. So from the adaptation side of view, I'll say we haven't gone somewhere, or we are not in a position where we really want to go. So we'll wait for next year, because they say the submissions are to be done next year in March. They maybe wait for the board meeting after that, go back to COP. I don't know if they're going to make any progress there, because the other issue which has stopped was to do with the adaptation committee. The committee has to be ready. They need to set up the committee, and then after that we can see how are we going to go about adaptation finance, which is very difficult for us as African nations. We are in much need of these finances to adapt to climate change, not to mitigate, because we are the least polluters, yet we are the most affected people. So right now, I think the only strategy we are left with is to go with our own national focal point. How to make sure that we can force or push them to make sure that they represent us well when it comes to advocating or negotiating for adaptation finance, because it's really lacking and it's something that we really need. We really need the finances as soon as possible in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's take a short break now, and coming up next, we'll dive into the incredible energy and the determination of the youths at COP29, who have shown up in record numbers to demand climate action. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Green Grow TV's COP29 series. So now we want to turn our focus to the passionate youths at COP29. So let me come to you, Axel. We've seen that in this present COP, there's been a lot of youth participation in this ongoing conference. What's been the drive on their participation, and what exactly have they been asking for? What exactly have they been demanding as regards climate issues, climate crisis, finance, and everything? What has been driving the youths there, and what exactly are the youths asking for at COP29?
Yes, there are many different demands. One is, I mean, one of their general umbrellas is climate justice. So, well, one particular demand is about that developed countries should pay up for basically their climate debt, whether it's having high historical emissions or having high financial capacity as it is now, usually both. And it has been talked about having financing in the trillions. So, for example, a coalition of European youth have demanded an NCQG in at least the trillions, which has been echoed by civil society. And another common demand is to include loss and damage as a sub-goal of the new collective quantified goal, to make sure that it actually receives appropriate attention. And then a third one is that we need to simultaneously do mitigation, reducing emissions, and ensuring that the root cause of climate change gets stopped, which is phasing out fossil fuels and other actions. And then, secondly, that adaptation needs to be prioritized, both in terms of giving strong political support by having a strong global goal adaptation, as well as providing it with the sufficient funding for actually implementing it. And then thirdly, that loss and damage needs to be recognized as a category to be financed, and that we need to provide sufficient support through the convention for countries and communities that are experiencing loss and damage. So those are a couple of different demands.
All right. So far, have any of these demands been met? Have we seen these demands or these voices that have been raised? Have they been able to turn into policies so far at COP29, considering that it's already coming to an end? So have they been given an ear, especially in decision making, to ensure that these demands actually turn into policy? So have we seen any improvement on either of these particular requests?
Yeah, so since we don't have the final decision, it's very hard to make a clear conclusion. But the way it's leaning towards is that there is mounting pressure from both parties, especially in Global South, and also from civil society, that the new financing needs to be in trillions, not billions. So in that sense, we can really see that the mobilization that young people have been part of is creating a pressure. And in terms of chasing out fossil fuels, it is very hard to see, because, as I said, we don't have a concrete text where basically the phase out or phase down of fossil fuels would have a natural place. But it is getting attention in both social media of the civil society organizations. There are many campaigns about making sure that phasing out fossil fuels is actually given attention. And for the last demands on the basically simultaneously prioritizing mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage.
All right.
One concrete issue is that for mitigation, the mitigation work program was first delayed to the next subsidiary body session, but then the COP took it on its agenda again. Exactly what the outcomes of this will be remains to be seen. And also for loss and damage and adaptation, there were several points that were forwarded to the next subsidiary body session. So in that sense, that's quite unfortunate from the perspective of those demands, that key items under all those three categories, mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, have been postponed
All right, thank you so much, Alex. So now, Melissa, let me come to you. Although the specific we don't have clear decisions that have necessarily been established, but a lot of commitments have been made, a lot of pledges have been made. What mechanisms do you think we need to be put in place to hold these commitments, to ensure that there's transparency in the allocation of the promised funds? What do you think, what steps or what strategies need to be put in place to ensure that commitments and pledges and even decisions that would eventually be reached would meet the desired goal and meet the right people that need to get these funds and all of that?
Okay, thank you for that. So maybe to start with that, right now people are moving with the Paris Agreement, and from that we can just see that the Paris Agreement is just a binding document, but it's not legalized, which is something that we really need to take a look into if we really want these global north countries to pay up or to make sure that they are able to fulfill their commitments. We need to come up with a binding agreement with legal consequences. If a certain state, a certain country doesn't meet up or doesn't pay up what they're supposed to pay up, then there is action that can be taken. And this can be an international law, which says one country fails to do this, they are going to be maybe to be sanctioned, or I don't know what measures they can do to make sure that the member states or the parties are able to keep up to their promises or their pledges. And also the other thing that can be done is can be transparent reporting and monitoring frameworks. We have seen with the pledges of the 100 billion, there haven't been any annual reporting, or maybe they've been, but it's not mandatory. So they need to make sure that these frameworks are mandatory. Each and every country, or each and every country from the global north, they need to make sure that they produce a report, an annual report, which is there to make sure that they're transparent, and there were some monitoring activities that were done in the disbursement of funds, project allocations, the timeline, and also maybe to add on to that, we need to take a look at the verification, the independence verification. We need to establish a body under the UNFCCC, which is there to audit and also to just make sure that they verify these climate finance commitments and disbursements. A certain country can say, okay, like what was happening? I wasn't just fully following the negotiations on NCQG, but there have been some pledges which were made by different countries. I even saw Australia pledging some funds. And how do we make sure that, how do we then follow up to make sure that these funds which were pledged by this certain country were fulfilled? We need to come up with that body under the UNFCCC, which then follows up. And I think if we are able to do that, then these are some of the measures we can come up with in order to make sure that all these pledges are met. And maybe lastly, to talk of the financial contribution benchmarks. Under the negotiations, we say we have a common but differentiated responsibilities. We need to set up some targets which can lead up to the 2030. I know we are dealing with the 2030, the 2050 agenda, but right now it's all to do with the 2030 agenda. Contribution, how each and every country can contribute according to their GDP to climate finance. Some countries are richer, some are richer than the others. So how do we make sure that there is fairness when it comes to them pledging to these climate finance? We also need to make sure that there is fair burden sharing of these climate finances. So yeah, I think I'll just end here for now. Thank you.
Thank you. So do you think that looking so far at the journey from the beginning of COP29 till now, do you think that COP29 will be able to offer hope for building climate resilience in vulnerable areas? Because, you know, the finance and the mitigation, everything, well, it's all just to help these vulnerable areas that are suffering from climate crisis. So far, do you think that COP29 has been able to or will be able to offer hope to build climate resilience for those that are suffering from this climate crisis in different parts of the world?
Well, from my personal view, I'll say no. Because the issue are happening right now, witnessing them first few years where these countries they just pledged, say we are going to do this. Like okay, for now, of course they've operationalized the loss and damage fund. But if we are to take a look at who is supposed to get that funding, now we are talking of 2025. They need to select the countries who will be responsible for receiving, or maybe the headquarters where the money will be going for the pledges, who is eligible to get those finances. Are they those countries that are vulnerable? So we now need to go back and take a look at the loss and damage criteria, eligibility criteria, because with climate crisis we can't predict what is going to happen to country A, what is going to happen to country B. These are emergence funds which must be there, and we do not need to say there is eligibility criteria for a certain country to have access to those funds. These are the funds which must be readily available anytime, any moment when there's a crisis in a certain area. So with these finances and all these criteria are some of these processes, how you need to go about it. I'll say to the vulnerable communities, these will not work because if a certain disaster happens in a certain community, it means there is need for instant funds. Don't need to first apply, waiting while these people will be suffering there. So with COP29, I will say no with the vulnerable communities, no, unless the countries, each and every country, have will set aside their own adaptation or different finances to say, okay, we are going to do this. Because with the mitigation finance, I'll tell you this, with the NDCs, countries placed to say we are going to do this. Now we have come to an end of I think the second phase, where now countries have to also commit to revise their NDCs. But countries have been saying from the global south, you always tell us to commit. We need to be ambitious of our commitments. How much are we going to reduce our carbon footprints with? And on top of that, there is no money to implement those NDCs. So what's the point of having a document which is well documented, but you can't implement that? For example, for my country, I'll say we need to reduce by 40%. But if there is no money for us to implement, and how are we going to reduce those carbon emissions by 40% if there are no finances? So it means we're just going to continue making good policies, good documents, but on the ground, there are no finances to implement what you would have put in the document. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that interesting perspective, Melissa. So let me come back to you, Alex. With warnings that we're in a final countdown to keep the temperature rise within the 1.5 degrees Celsius, have there been significant agreement at COP29 to steer nations back on track to meet this critical goal? What's the outlook on that particular goal that we're trying to achieve, or are we still in danger, or would it just remain like this? Just let me know what's the particular progress on that target that we're looking to meet.
Yes, I would divide this into two parts. One is what the countries actually say, that whether they're supporting the 1.5 degree goal or not. And I haven't heard any significant change in the number of parties that support still having 1.5 degrees as a guiding star. But secondly, it is about the actual implementation on the ground, and year by year, it's looking more and more dire. There are some scientific bodies that are saying that 1.5 degrees Celsius might not even be possible anymore. And if it were possible, it would require very, very drastic changes now. So in the corridors among civil society, among other actors that are involved in this process, including among party delegates, I hear more and more recognition that maybe it will be very, very difficult to reach the 1.5 degrees goal, maybe even impossible as it is now. But I haven't heard an intention to remove that goal. I think there is still commitment towards having it as a goal, but whether there is kind of enough policy in the countries that are supposed to implement the Paris Agreement to really make sure that we stay below 1.5 degrees, that is questionable because, as you might have seen in the latest emissions gap report, I
Right.
remember that we are currently with the current NDCs or the current, I think it's NDCs, we're heading towards about 3.1 degrees Celsius warming by the end of this, yeah,
2030.
near
Yeah.
future. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, so just finally, as we wrap up the program, I just want to know, what would a successful COP29 look like to you, especially particularly looking at helping the developing nations, building resilience, adaptation, and of course, mitigation of the climate crisis. So now that we have come to the end, or well, we're not necessarily at the end yet, but we're drawing very near to the end. So now that we're at this stage, what would a successful COP29 look like to you?
From my perspective, a successful COP29 would be one where the interests of all parties are equally reflected in the text. And this has been a very large challenge in previous COPs, since many delegations have had the resources to finance hundreds or even over thousands delegates to attend the COP, whereas others have had one delegate or even maybe no delegate actually. So there is a fundamental imbalance in the power at the table. And from my perspective, as someone who facilitates a program training young people to negotiate on behalf of their countries with a special focus on climate vulnerable countries, it is essential that every country has in practice the same power at the table. Exactly what an outcome would look like if that were the case, it is hard to say, but I think the fundamental step is that the outcome should be equally shaped by a country that has a low-income country as a high-income country, because that's how this process was intended: one country, one vote.
All right. So let me also throw that question to you, Melissa, as well, as we wrap up the program. I also want to know, what would a successful COP29 be to you? What can happen? I mean, nothing is impossible, even though we just have one more day to go. Just one decision might change everything. So what would a successful COP29 be to you as well?
Okay, for me, I'll say just going along with the main focus of this COP29, the main focus has been on the finances, to make sure that the global south countries, they receive enough finance to combat climate change. So for me, it would be very impressive to hear that the decisions made at the final COP29 day, they are on finances, how much countries are going to pledge, how much the global north is willing not to pledge, only because with pledges they might not be able to fulfill their pledges. So we need something that is on the table. How much do we have on the table? And also, if it comes to is it, because for now we are saying we don't want the loans, we don't want the in the name of investments, finances. No, we don't want that. We want these finances to be in form of grants, where we can be able to easily access them. So if we have these finances in terms of grants, not debts, not loans, because this is going to add more burden to the crisis that we are already facing. So for me, it will be an issue to do with the grants, the finances. We need more money. How much money are these parties going to pledge, especially on the loss and damage finances? And also maybe to speak on the adaptation finances. Are they going to say, now we are going to set aside, or there's going to be a board that is going to take care of the adaptation finances, just like the mitigation? So I think for that with these two, it will be a successful hope for me. Otherwise, if it's not like that, for me, it will be more of people just meeting, they go, it's a holiday for them, political issues, their own interest, without people at heart, especially those who are not here, the vulnerable communities, they are not well represented. And they are not even represented, most of them. We come here to try to represent them, but our issues, maybe we are the young people, they are not fully considered. But what we need is the adaptation finances, and as well as the climate finances, to make sure that we are able to combat and deal with this issue of climate crisis. Thank you.
Alex and Melissa, we do appreciate your inputs. So, well, as the conversations in Baku have highlighted the immense challenges, but aside that, there's also the incredible opportunities to build a future that safeguards people and, of course, the planet from innovative solutions to calls for equitable finance. It's very obvious that the journey towards resilience requires both collaboration and, of course, commitment and definitely courage. That's about it on the program. I am Tony Ogubanjo. Till next time, it's bye for now.